Earlier this year, social media erupted with confessions of full-on ugly crying during the ending of Inside Out 2. While Pixar films are notorious for making us feel all the feels, there is something uniquely powerful about the Inside Out premise. Our main character isn't just a vulnerable young girl facing life obstacles, it's an ensemble of personified emotions, representations of her protective inner mechanisms, like little neurochemical guardian angels. Rather than only seeing ourselves reflected in an individual, which pretty much describes every movie, here we also identify with the biological architecture that shapes her actions. The films were written with the consultancy of neuroscientists, and there's a certain wholesome universality to this approach. When the film holds a mirror to our basic cognitive functions, we're not just recognizing the universal humanity in Riley's struggles, but also the universal limits and wonders of human biology, a cathartic confrontation with the human condition that lays bare the chemical basis of our emotional messiness. It's tempting to think that by binding the premise in neuroscience, the film transcends the particularities of social influence, but sometimes art can tell us the most about society when it's least determined to do so. And the Inside Out films, in their attempt to dramatize immutable biological processes, inadvertently represent a culturally specific diagnosis that plagues us all, a modern development that we've come to accept as timeless and universal: narcissism. Let's dive in.
We are on in 5, 4, 3.
Alright, let's start with the first movie. Inside Out follows 11-year-old Riley Anderson as she copes with moving from Minnesota to San Francisco, where she has no friends and insane people put broccoli on pizza.
Congratulations, San Francisco! You've ruined pizza!
Inside her head reside her emotions: joy, sadness, anger, fear, and disgust, who use a console to guide her towards emotional well-being and away from harm. Whenever something significant happens in Riley's life, it becomes a core memory, each colored by the dominant emotion associated with the event. These core memories collectively determine her personality islands, the unique qualities that make Riley Riley. The film is full of imaginative portrayals of neurological functions. There's a labyrinthian library of memories, an abyss of forgotten trivialities, a literal train of thought, a compound holding abstract thought, and a Hollywood studio where dreams are produced. It's all a very clever representation of how our internal architecture is a wondrous mechanism driven by a singular, profound purpose to ensure our well-being. And that's been true forever. It's just advancements in science and technology that have allowed us to finally visualize it with such creative flair, right? Well, kinda. In 1979, historian Christopher Lasch published the book The Culture of Narcissism, in which he claimed that American culture had taken a sharp turn inward, where we've stopped caring about our impact on the world or our place in a collective history, and have focused only on rationalizing our inner lives. Now, it's important to note that Lasch's use of the term narcissism is closer to self-hatred than self-love. It's a constant need for external validation. Lasch claimed that American culture had entered an ahistorical therapeutic phase. In the past, concepts such as meaning and love were an exercise in self-sacrifice, where we would act out of submission to a higher loyalty, a sense of duty. Back then, it was common to sacrifice your entire lifetime for the advancement of a project, the growth of your community, the advancement of your religious ideas, the prosperity of your descendants. Whereas today, love and meaning merely means the fulfillment of our individual emotional needs. Inside Out is the literal manifestation of Lasch's diagnosis. When the core memories get displaced, the personality islands stop functioning, and joy and sadness have to bring them back to headquarters. If Riley can't properly process her memories, she risks losing important aspects of her identity, because implicitly, well-being is about finding comfort in our identity and maintaining emotional stability, not in impacting the world. We can think of no greater project beyond our inner selves. Per Lasch, for the narcissist, the world is a mirror, whereas the rugged individualist saw it as an empty wilderness to be shaped by his own design. Lasch calls this therapy culture an anti-religion, not simply because it's scientific, but because it, quote, has no future, no ambition beyond immediate emotional needs. In this way, Inside Out is a reflection of neuroscience as much as it is the therapy culture that champions emotional well-being as its highest ideal. So, how did this happen? Why did we all of a sudden turn inward? According to Lash, it has to do with the erosion of traditional authority. Back in the day, we were told who to be and what to do by external figures like priests, family elders, and teachers, but in modern society, we've lost confidence in these authorities. Now it's up to us to decide who we become. Sounds liberating, yeah? Well, again, not quite. For philosopher Slavoj Žižek, instead of spontaneously crafting our own standards and values, this gap in authority gets filled by something far more insidious, a consumer ideology that commands us to enjoy. Under the influence of this modern superego, we can only feel like worthwhile individuals if we get sufficient enjoyment from life. Enter joy.
We are gonna have a good day, which will turn into a good week, which will turn into a good year, which turns into a good life.
In the first film, Joy insists that happiness is life's highest purpose, and that sadness is a useless Debbie Downer that only causes Riley harm. So she tries to keep sadness away from the core memories to avoid harshing Riley's mellow.
I'm sorry. Riley needs to be happy.
This is a prime example of how a movie about neuroscience inadvertently becomes a commentary on culture. The arc of the movie is that Joy eventually realizes that we need sadness in order to be emotionally balanced people, but it's not hard to imagine that this arc was chosen not because our brain chemicals have agency and bully each other, but because the cultural injunction to enjoy is something we all deal with. We all strive for a life minimizing sadness. We all feel inadequate if we're not enjoying enough, and Inside Out reminds us not only that sadness is a natural state, but that the idea that we can live life without it, a cultural sentiment, is misguided.
I came to help because of sadness.
Now, there are consequences to this turn inward. Žižek argues that this authority that withholds self-esteem unless you sufficiently enjoy is more authoritarian than the priests and elders of yesteryear. For example, he often paints a scenario in which your mother asks you to visit your grandmother in a nursing home.
Hi, Grandma.
Well, look who's here.
Back then, your mother would just tell you, you're gonna go visit your grandmother today, doesn't matter if you don't like it, you're going. Whereas, these days your mom would guilt you and say, well, you only have to go if you really want to, but you know, your grandmother really loves you. Of course, either way, you're going. But in giving you the illusion of choice, not only do you have to physically go, but you have to mentally want to go. At least in the old formulation, you maintained the right to do it reluctantly, but with the modern superego, it's not only your actions that are policed, so are your emotions. And the weight of that punitive superego, that relentless vindictive cop inside your head, is exactly what we see in Inside Out 2. Inside Out 2 picks up 2 years after the events of Inside Out. Riley's now 13 and about to enter high school. She and her buddies Bree and Grace are invited to a weekend ice hockey camp where they have an opportunity to get in with the cool kids and maybe even make the team as incoming freshmen.
If we impress Coach, she'll put the 3 of us on the team next year.
Ooh, the Firehawks!
Meanwhile, Joy and the crew now oversee a new part of Riley's mind, her sense of self.
I'm a good person.
Underneath this tree-like structure resides her belief system, comprised of memories and feelings that constitute her core convictions.
I'm a good person.
For Žižek, a good person in modern culture is one who constantly enjoys, desires, and finds new ways of improving themselves. And in order for Riley to maintain this self-image post-puberty, a new player will have to take the reins. One night, the puberty alarm goes off, ushering in a new host of emotions that come in on a literal wrecking ball, including envy, embarrassment, ennui, nostalgia, and their ringleader, anxiety. As Riley arrives at hockey camp, Joy's desire for fun clashes with anxiety's relentless focus on achievement and social status.
And my job is to protect her from the scary stuff she can't see. I plan for the future.
When Joy's playfulness lands Riley in trouble with the coach, anxiety determines that the classic emotions are no longer needed. So they get bottled up, thrown into a memory vault, and anxiety takes over.
Now, let's change everything about you.
Discarding Riley's old sense of self and replacing it with an anxiety-dominated one that orients Riley's decisions towards status and recognition, even at the expense of her friendships.
If I'm a firehawk, I won't be alone.
This anxiety-shaped identity mirrors the social imperatives we all feel under this consumerist authority. In his book, The Ticklish Subject, Zizek claims that ideals such as success, popularity, and bodily fitness often turn back on the self. Unlike traditional authorities that set clear boundaries, this modern drive for self-improvement is even more relentless. It doesn't tell us what we can't do, it constantly urges us to do more, to be better, to be our true selves. But this better is an ever-receding horizon, and our true selves are an imaginary destination, leading to a perpetual cycle of inadequacy and anxiety. At one point in the film, Joy discovers that anxiety has been using Riley's imagination to conjure up endless worst-case scenarios. Since Riley can be anything, that includes an endless list of possible bad things, so anxiety needs to steer her toward the version that enjoys the most adoration, prestige, and envy.
This is all so Riley can be happier.
This insistence that we can choose our own fate and define our own ideal selves leads to crippling anxiety, because there's no excuse not to shape yourself into a perfect human being. This relentless pressure eventually takes its toll on Riley. Anxiety's constant drive for perfection leads Riley to sneak into her coach's office, where she learns she hasn't made the cut yet. But since her performance in the final tryout is under her control and could potentially change the coach's mind,
Well, we're just gonna have to change Coach's mind.
anxiety's grip tightens even further. Despite making progress with the cool kids and proving her athletic abilities, she's plagued by self-doubt, becoming increasingly irritable and withdrawn.
I'm not good enough.
Herein lies a lethal contradiction. This very command to enjoy, Zizek claims, paradoxically sabotages enjoyment. The more one obeys this command to enjoy, improve, and seize life to the fullest, the more one feels guilty about not achieving enough happiness, improvement, or success. As Riley makes progress towards her goal, she only gets more and more strict with herself.
I'm not good enough.
Even after scoring 2 goals, a pretty impressive feat, her anxiety doesn't abate, it intensifies, leading her to injure Grace and land herself in the penalty box. Meanwhile, the old emotions have found a way to ride an avalanche of forgotten bad memories back to headquarters. But by the time Joy arrives, anxiety and Riley have reached burnout. Zizek claims that burnout, or what he calls an autistic masturbatory asocial jouissance, is an inevitable result of a culture with no directive other than personal fulfillment. He draws a comparison to drug addiction. Like a drug addict who inevitably falls into a cycle of chasing highs to avoid withdrawal, modern subjects get trapped into a cycle of chasing constant gratifications to mask inevitable disappointments. Here, Riley's meltdown is the culmination of the turn inward, a nauseating cycle of ambition and self-flagellation that leads nowhere but exhaustion, crisis, and withdrawal. Similar to the conclusion of Inside Out, the sequel ends with an insistence that the bad stuff has to be integrated. Joy tries to re-implement the old sense of self, but the panic attack persists. Eventually, both anxiety and Joy relent that they cannot determine who Riley becomes.
We don't get to choose who Riley is.
So they discard that sense of self too, and allow for a new one to form from a mix of positive and negative memories. Riley reconciles with Bree and Grace, and the emotions all agree on a new status quo where each play a vital role. Even anxiety ensures that Riley doesn't forget to study.
Oh, Riley has a Spanish test tomorrow. We need to study.
Oh, you're right.
The film ends on an ambiguous note as to whether or not Riley made the team. She just smiles at the camera because even if she didn't make it, she's comfortable with who she is, both the good and the bad. Or maybe she does make it? I don't know, that smile is pretty intense. So what's the message of the Inside Out films? There's something quite telling in the fact that the inciting incident of the second film is the blaring of the puberty alarm, overtly tying the plot to a biological process. The conflicts of both films also seem deliberately designed to be as common as possible, the challenge of moving to a place with no friends or wanting recognition from role models. The message seems to be that growing up is hard, we're all armed with the same chemicals to deal with it, and we'll all stumble along the way. But sometimes art can't help but accidentally tell the truth. If Joy and anxiety say it's not up to them to decide who Riley becomes, then who does? Is Riley truly in charge, or are her emotions merely reacting to the relentless onslaught of cultural expectations? Instead of depicting a universal psychology, the film portrays a psyche besieged by a universal self-imposed tyranny born from our culture of narcissism. One of Lash's most prescient concerns was how narcissism had, quote, disappeared from sight. Basically, this turn inward has become so ingrained that we don't even notice it anymore. Narcissism has simply become a metaphor for the human condition. And the Inside Out films are the ultimate vindication of Lash's point. They take our collective preoccupation with emotional fulfillment and frame it as a story about human biology. As Zizek would say, it's pure ideology.
It's pure ideology.
Lash warned that when we view narcissism as an inherent aspect of human nature, we risk ignoring the specific societal factors that contributed to its rise. We implicitly admit that withdrawing to ourselves is a preferable alternative to thinking soberly about the world. And you know, on some level, I think the film actually acknowledges this. Something that really stood out to me was Maya Hawke's performance as Anxiety, who actually doesn't even sound all that anxious.
Without our projections, we won't be prepared.
Anger always sounds irritated.
This again?
Sadness always sounds melancholy.
Find the fun.
Ennui always sounds French.
Pardon, excusez-moi.
But Anxiety just kind of sounds normal.
Which means we're gonna need ideas. Lots of them.
I mean, Kyle's cousin Kyle and Morty Smith sound more anxious than Anxiety.
A wooden dice all that are available. I usually prefer the plastic ones because these give me splinters.
But maybe that's the point, that the experience of generalized insecurity has just become the nature of things. Anxiety is so pervasive that it no longer requires emphasis. It's just our everyday reality. To be clear, I like Inside Out. I too get emotional during the ending, and I too think there's something cathartic and productive in how these movies allow us to recognize our shared vulnerabilities. But within this formulation also lies a resignation that these vulnerabilities cannot be alleviated by fixing the outside world. That seems utterly impossible. So we turn inward, because on some level, we've all faced the harsh realization that ourselves are the only sites of progress open to us. Hey guys, thanks for watching. Shout out to everyone who's been supporting the channel by donating on my Ko-fi page. It really means a lot, so thank you. There's a link down below if you'd like to contribute. Also, follow me on Twitch, check out my movie reviews on Letterboxd, join the Discord. All those links are in the description, so click them all. And again, thanks for watching. Peace.